set out to find who painted this painting, I didn't think it would consume 4 years of my life. That's a big chunk of the small amount I have left. When I set out to record what I'd found in these videos, I didn't think it would be such a big undertaking. But back then I didn't know that the painter I was looking for was using an innocent scene to hide a violent drama, or that he could turn walls into temples, or that he was someone who looked at the world around him just as patches and flashes of joined-up light. And I didn't know that he could paint distance that you could walk right into, and I definitely didn't expect that he could paint the smallest objects ever painted. I thought the person I was looking for was just another painter, but I was very wrong. Welcome back to Vermeer's Child, where in this episode we're going to have a look at everything else that's in this painting. That is, everything except the woman and the child, and as always you'll see things that are both wonderful and impossible. And we're going to find ourselves at last standing at Vermeer's door and wondering whether the artist upstairs in the studio was the one who painted this extraordinary little painting. We've spent quite a lot of time on the right wall of this painting, so I want to now move left of that and start by having a look at these windows. And they look a little bit basic. Probably the only Vermeer painting that has more basic windows would be the little street. But most of the other windows, of course, are generally at a very sharp angle, so it's actually pretty hard to see what they are, and it's very hard to see what textures he's used on those paintings. But you get a general idea of it. I think what's happening here is that there could be curtains, very thin curtains, in the upper windows. There's obviously dark yellow curtains in the lower part. But there could also be curtains at the top, and I'll show you why that is. Because if we have a look at this area, you'll see that it appears that he's either chosen to really emphasise the light there, or he's indicating something, and there's this sinewy shape as you run down the windows as well. And it seems to be completely covered, and yet where these coats of arms are doesn't seem to have the same covering. So I can't guarantee that they're curtains, but they certainly, either that or it's just an incredible amount of light has been shown hitting the glass there. But for some reason he doesn't show it hitting exactly where these coats of arms are. The other thing that's worth noting while we're at this point is this strange parallax. It looks like it's been set up in error, doesn't it? And then corrected. I'm not 100% sure that's right though, because some of it's quite detailed and some isn't. So I'm just wondering whether there was some way of constructing the windows, where they used an inner and outer layer of lead, because this seems to have some sort of a hoop just at that point there. The only other house that I've seen that does have something that's a little bit similar, although I've only seen it in photographs, is Rembrandt's house in Amsterdam. It seems to have a window that looks in photographs like it's got an inner and outer leaf on this pattern part. The rest of it's just sort of normal, but it does seem to have something unusual about that part of the window. But generally, I just frankly don't know the answer to that. You'll notice in this window here, there's actually something stuck on whatever that is. If it can't be on the curtain, you'd imagine, so it must be stuck on the actual glass or something. But there's also something hanging just here on the wood. I'm not quite sure what that represents. You can see it's actually got a little bit of an arc out this side, and we'll see some tiny objects on this as always with this painting. One thing I'd like you to notice again is if you have a look at the central mullion and the one on the left and there's also the one on the right, what you'll notice is we get some of these strange sinuous temple type shapes again. But you've got to look into the painting a bit to see what I'm talking about. And if you follow it up a little bit, you'll start to see that either the wood is supposed to be incredibly carved as it goes up here. I mean, look at this whole arc around here. It's either incredibly carved or just some sort of a aberration of the phone. I mean, you can see what looks like incredible amount of detail in this area here. Now, this is a phone photograph, so it's a little bit more contrasty. I think it's, again, a shape disguised in the middle of this column, because you can see how many different layers there are and how they all seem to have some sort of form to them. So I think what we're seeing is sort of more elaborate columns. And also there's some over here just on the very left of the painting as well. So either it's showing a house that has very carved frame around the edge of the window, which seems a bit unlikely, or he's showing that this again fits the sort of secret story that we had a look at in the previous episodes. And it's also the same on the right hand side. We've seen some of that before with the column that's carved right down the right here. You can see in this photo how the artist has textured the glass on the window and the wood quite differently. And see these little wooden, probably nails through the wood where the frame's been constructed. They're all over the place on this. You can see a few of them here, but quite incredible detail in the glass. I really like the way this glass has been done. It looks like you'd imagine a piece of obscure glass would look, and it's really super thin paint, whereas the timber itself, you can see the grain in it, which again is incredibly skillful. On this section of the frame you can actually see that there's a little object painted just here. It's got a metal bit through the end of it with some sort of just a pin through it. So again, a fairly tiny object, but we'll see some much clearer ones. I particularly like this bubble in the glass that's up here. This is painted, it's not actually a hole or something like that. It's the fact that you can see a bubble would tend to indicate that these aren't curtains in the top. It's just showing incredibly bright light on the window, but it certainly looks a bit like curtains to me. So that's a painted bubble. And you can see some of these leading across actually seems to have a bit of texture here and there. It's not consistently textured, but in parts of it looks very more detailed. See, like here, you see he's rolled his brush, and you get this sort of rope-like effect as it goes across. The painting has a hole through it in the window as well. This is not a painted hole, this is a real hole, but it lets you see exactly how it's been painted, or at least what's underneath this paint. You can see that as this is broken out, this piece of the ground layer is broken out, it's taken little chips with it, and so you can get an idea that there's absolutely nothing under this. This has been painted by the artist straight onto this canvas. There's no other painting that's been cleaned off it or anything. It's a nice close-up view of the linen anyway, and the cracked ground layer. In the previous episodes we saw some really tiny little objects, and I just want to point out one that's on the lower part of the centre of the frame. It's a hook, and you can see it comes out and goes up here. It actually has quite a lot of other things happening with it as well. If you look at it closely, you'll actually see that there's some detail along the edge of it. And then when it gets up here, there's actually some twisting metal, and it comes into another object. It looks it's got a sort of a black, I don't know, it's a black and silver part of it, or I mean this is obviously silver, but you can see even a little hinge up the top here, and a small something small connecting there. I think what this is this connects back into that. It looks a bit like a lady's watch. I hope it's not, but I think it's some sort of a bracelet or something. It seems a very gratuitous thing to hang up on a window frame, but it's some sort of a piece of jewellery. There's also this little piece here. Initially I thought, this indicates that he's had two goes at it, but if you have a look at that bit there, there's actually a little chain that connects it. Just because these objects are small, I'll give you the sizing of it. So the hook is about 3.9 millimetres long, and this little object here is only 0.5 millimetre wide. So it's just another remarkable thing about this painting, and showing that these things might all have meaning. There's even a little bit of chain or something running down there. These things might all have meaning in the painting, but it almost seems as if this artist has just enjoyed himself, drawing these gratuitous or painting these gratuitous objects. It's a bit like the nail that sticks out of the wall in The Milkmaid. It seems, unnecessary, but it really is quite extraordinary to look at. I'm not going to go through all the things that are on this window. There's incredible shapes in this area here. Some of them don't even look like they're earthly. There's something hanging down just here as well. You can sort of start to see some twists at the bottom of it there. I don't know what it is. And that's where that hook is. I think that maybe it's hanging from that hook. It's very difficult to see, but there's a minute shackle of some sort with a chain coming down from it. Some sort of a wire or chain hanging out of it. You can even see there's another one. There's something else just there as well. There's stuff all over this painting. I mean, obviously there's heaps of white dust on it as well. come down this right-hand side, this is an interesting object. There's some sort of a mechanism for the window here. It's got a couple of arcs of metal that seem to be connected in parallel, and it seems to operate some sort of a third lever. So I don't know, you must have to pull on something and somehow all these interact and it affects this thing that's sticking out. You can just see a little head of something sticking out there, and I'll show you what that is. So when you enlarge it, it starts to take on a bit of a form, and you can see it's got some multicolours. It's got silver around the outside and black and red on the inside, and it has a really interesting shape to it. What it appears to look like is a bit like a goldfish, or a koi fish, if you've ever seen one. They have this incredible patterning. Obviously, this is now silver on the outside of it and silver around the head of it, it looks like. But I mean, it could be anything, but that's what it looks like to me. It looks a bit like a fish. It's a very, very bizarre thing. You can actually see even little bits in here that are painted. And this object would be, certainly no more than 1 millimetre. So incredibly tiny. I mean, if it's not painted, the alternative is that somehow paint is splashed in this incredible pattern, something which I just don't think is the case. You notice this strange colour around the outside of it, and it does make me wonder whether some of these silver objects have been created elsewhere and then applied to the painting. One of the features of this painting seems to be that there are some strange bits of silver all over the place. And here's one here. Now, I don't think this is a hair, and it looks like it's silver metal, and you can see where it's crossed over the cracks in the painting. It seems to have remained intact. It does have some componentry to it. In other words, it looks like it's sort of articulated in some way. But you'll notice it's thicker on one end and very fine on the other end as it heads around here. So I'm just not sure what that is. It's how big would it be? It's probably about 8 or 9 millimetres long, something like that, 10 millimetres long. But it's absolutely minuscule in width. It almost seems like this thing's hanging off it, doesn't there? So that's the windows. Look, we could spend a lot of time on each of these things. I think there's about 10 PhDs left in this painting for anyone who wants to do the research, if it ends up in a research institution at some stage, which I hope it does. I don't plan to go in any depth with any of these things. For example, this is a piece of ironmongery of some sort. It's obviously some sort of a window attachment here. It's probably just some sort of a stay for the window. And when that gets eventually cleaned up and looked at, you'll see that it's extremely detailed. There's one on the left side as well, which is the same. But all of these sort of superfine details indicates that someone has spent a frightening amount of time on this painting. Know how you would complete it in a lifetime, to be quite honest. It's either been done by someone who's an extremely fast painter or someone who's just fastidious and spent a hell of a lot of time on it. Between the chair and the woman there's a green wall, and I'll say up front that I really don't have much of an idea what's going on this wall. I think it's got a sheen of dirt over it, which is very easy to see, and once that's cleaned off, we'll actually be able to see what's going on. I know that I've said a couple of times that I've got concerns about cleaning old paintings. My issue is less with actually cleaning them, in other words, just cleaning the dirt off the varnish, than it is with actually removing the varnish and revarnishing, because obviously when you've got objects that look like they've been painted right down to 1 millimetre, the chances of removing those when you remove the varnish, particularly if the varnish has adhered to them in some way, is really too risky. But stabilising the canvas and then cleaning off the surface of dirt is something that would make a big difference to this painting, and it'd certainly make a big difference to the brightness of the colours. And I think on this wall in particular we'd be able to see what's going on. What you can see though, there's some small shapes that appear to have some functional meaning, and you can see there's a little bit of silver poking out there, there's a little bit of silver around an object there. There's various gaps and bits and pieces in this that are showing a little bit of something going on that I think we're supposed to be able to just see. I believe it'll be more of that Olympus temple story that's going on even in the windows above. You'll also see in the top left-hand corner there's something which starts on the green wall and then runs over the woman's red dress, and that's one of the aberrations of this painting that made me think initially that there was something underneath this that had just been painted over. But we'll see later on how these have a function. There's also a brown object down below here, and we'll have a look when we get round to the floor what that is, and you'll notice that there's a row of something dark across the bottom of the little platform. Presumably it's some sort of a border tile along the bottom of the wall. just because it's hard to see exactly what's going on here doesn't mean that we can't see anything. So let's just have a look over. You can remember this shape that's on the edge of the chair. I just want you to look to the left of it, and you'll see that it runs out a lot further than we were looking at before. And you can see it also goes into some sort of a larger object in this space. There's something painted under there. I'm not going to be able to tell you what it is, obviously, but I can tell you that at least there's stuff going on all over this wall. Now, under the window, as you can see, there's some sort of it looks like a garland hanging down, but I don't know how far it goes, though. It doesn't seems to sort of disappear here somewhere in the middle. So I'm not quite clear what that is. And then there's something large towards the centre that hangs down as well. There is a V here, which I'm not going to make anything of. When you see it in raking light, it's actually a bit stronger, but it certainly wouldn't stand for Vermeer. If anything, if it was a real V, it would probably stand for Vulcan in this context, because Vermeer would have used an M, I think, for his name, not a V if he was writing something like that. So the other thing I want to point out is I think that whatever is below this window is actually hanging. Now, it's really hard for me to nail focus along this edge to show you the hooks, but there are some little connectors at various intervals. I think there's one there, and I think there's one there. There's silver things that have got a bit of form to them. You can see actually a silver object just there, hanging down as well. So, although this is really hard to work out what's going on this wall, there are things going on. I'll just show you some things in the middle of it now, because they're really interesting as well. If we go in here, you'll see there's a shape that it looks like a bone, but it's got a couple of things sticking out of it. But this whole thing obviously connects somehow. And where's it going to? It's heading up towards this corner, and this corner somehow connects across to the chair. You can see there's some sort of a connector across here, and just some faint shadows of connection running across this way. So somehow the chair connects to something that's below the window, and the thing that's below the window starts to come down and connect, I think, all the way down to the woman. And we'll have a good look at that when we get to that part later. But there's objects that are hidden in the gloom here. Here's one. It's obviously a metal object. No idea what it is. And there's one there that looks a bit like a handle. It looks like the inside of a door of a 1970s car, which obviously it's not. But it's very peculiar. I just want to go on a brief diversion to have a look at this painting. It's a 1656 painting by Vermeer called The Procuress, and it shows a girl accepting money from a client, and this is actually a woman in the background. But the figure over on the left-hand side has always been regarded by experts as being Vermeer, and I was always a bit doubtful of that, but I think it actually probably is. And there's some really important tells. If we zoom in on it, I just want you to note his face is in shadow. There's some markings on his forehead which are a bit more apparent when you zoom out. There's some sort of a patch there, but I can't make much of that. But what's really interesting to me is that there's something there, and it looks to me like it's a black stone surrounded by silver. Now, when you look at the Google Arts and Culture image, this doesn't show up at all. So I don't know whether it's real or not, but I think it probably is, because if you go in and have a look just down here, you'll see that there's another little jewel as well. You'll notice that he's actually standing next to something that looks like a bit of a temple shape that goes up behind this woman. So the two things that I really want to draw to your attention are the fact that there do appear to be some gratuitous jewels on this, and that could well be a jewel in his hair, and also this colour. The yellow, the red, going into grey. Now let's just go back and have a look at my little painting. So this is the area we've been looking at. And if you have a look at the leg of this chair, just in that area, you'll notice that those colours, this reddy pink colour bleeding into yellow next to the grey, is something that Vermeer used in the Procurus. And if you have a look just to the right, you'll see a silver jewel with a black stone in the middle. So there's a lot of similarities going on here with his Procurus painting. And this is a most unusual colour combination, I think. And just the fact that there was a black stoned jewel set in silver. Now, there's quite a lot of these sorts of things on this painting, but I don't think a forger would have even seen that in the Dresden painting, let alone thought to reproduce these three things together. So, interesting, perhaps a little coincidence, but it seems to be getting us a lot closer to Vermeer. One thing that is clear from even a cursory glance at this area of the painting is that we're dealing with a very old painting. There's no way that someone could forge all of these indications of age. You just couldn't get paint to bend up and cup like this. I don't think even Van Meegeren would have achieved this level of aging on a painting, and he put his paintings in an oven to bake. But the thing for me that really reinforces the age is that there's a lot of objects in this painting that I've got no term of reference for. They're just things that I've never seen before. You can see that there's a little pin or something just there, some sort of little thing with a decoration on it. This is where these little hooks are across the top of the back wall. But all of these little things just don't seem to relate in any way to anything that we'd understand from this era. So it certainly is representing something from the view of a person centuries ago. Obviously would have had ready meaning to them, but we have to try and interpret what it all means. Anyway, let's go a bit further around the painting and have a look at the area just above the door. The first thing to notice about this area of the painting is how smooth the paint is. Now, although you can see a few bits where it's catching a bit of light there, this is about the only area of the painting where you can see the checkerboard weave of the support canvas underneath. And that's because the paint is incredibly thin. Even in the windows, the artist put a bit of texture into them in a crisscross pattern, and I think that was because they used to hammer glass flat in those days. They'd cut it from a cylinder and hammer it flat, probably on wood. So you would expect that the glass would have some texture marks from whatever it's being hammered over. And also, the glass, of course, won't be smooth because there'll be hammer blows on it. So it's quite a different process, but this is really quite smooth. Now, what I do want to point out, though, is start from the very right edge, and you'll see how this very first column right on the edge of the window is carved, and I pointed that out before. But I think what happens in this area of the painting is that this whole thing on the right-hand side, which is just a double piece of wood probably, is supposed to be read as something round because it has some curved marks on it. And I think it's the same thing as we've seen before. It's sort of a temple shape. And if you come down here, you'll see that there's incredibly detailed carving of the wood around where the window frame of the lower window joins the upper window. But you can just pick out some marks here, and it's going to be very hard to show you because I'll probably have to show you just by protecting the highlights and dropping down the brightness a little bit until we get just a few shapes of light paint. But in the midst of all of this, there's some big round column and temple sort of shapes here. So I think that this is, again, just representing this looking upwards towards some Olympus type of heaven. It's very much harder to detect on this part of the painting, but there are some little tiny details, there's a few nails and bits and pieces being painted in here. There is a larger object which is just in this area that I'll also show you. So just on top of the door there's sort of a fan-shaped bit of carving of some sort, and it seems to have some linkage to another piece that's nearby it, but I can't quite work out what it is. I'll show you that in a video in a second because it's a bit easier to see. But in general, there's not a lot to be seen here. That doesn't mean, of course, that there's no decorative elements in this part of the painting at all. In fact, if you look along this line here, you'll see that there's some small painted objects. Exactly what they are is unclear, but there's some sort of a decorated object that's running along here. You'll also see it just at this edge. There's there seems to be some sort of a metal rod along here that seems to have some small elements that are catching light, and they do look to be jewelled, but I guess it could be some aberration of the varnish or the paint that's causing disappearance, but it certainly seems more deliberate than that, although to achieve it, if it's deliberately painted, would be extraordinarily painstaking. You can see some of it just here, around this part of it. So it certainly has some of the same elements of the rest of the painting, but doesn't appear to be as detailed, but it remains to be seen, of course, what's underneath any dirt on top of it. So now I want to move down and deal with the area below the brown area at the top. We'll come down to about the top of the woman's head and right down to the bottom of this archway just here. We'll deal with the tiles and then we'll deal with the floor. The first thing to notice about the archway is that you can see a whole lot of highlights just down the right hand side of it. You can see some streaks coming down, and if we zoom in on those highlights, you can immediately see that the archway is hiding a whole lot of shapes here. And perhaps it's supposed to appear as iron, but I don't think it was any gate that was ever actually in this particular archway because it's so detailed. I think this is again part of our mythological story. There seems to be some sort of a figure up the top here that is on some plinth or other. Looks like a large stone or something there, doesn't it? This looks a bit like a face, I'm not quite sure, but I don't think this is actually in an archway in Delft because you can see that some of these edges hang off. Now, obviously, if that was a gate on that side, they would hang off, but they also hang off on this side as well, which I think indicates that this is something a bit more than that. Incredibly elaborate. And actually surprisingly hard to see. Most photographs, it just comes up as a brown wall. It's only when you get the light just at the right angle. And it's the same with all these photographs. You have to have the light just where it needs to be. Otherwise you can't see these things at all. Now, the other thing I want to point out before we go too far on this is the underpainting, which we're starting to see now. All of this area has got green underpainting. Possibly not the top bit where the sun is. It looks like it comes across here. And you can see it's all down here is green. So he's painted this green in first, and then he's put the walls on top of it. You can see that where there's going to be shadow, he's kept the green at an angle. It runs back here, and then you see it run up over towards the boy. And he doesn't actually paint right up to the edges. He clearly just wants to get on with the painting, so he paints and just leaves a little gap between two colours, which shows that this is an artist who was pretty confident about his setting out. He knew exactly how he was going to colour certain things and presumably put a complementary colour underneath. You'll recall that over in the area of the chair he used a very bright yellow. I don't know whether we can see that here still. You can probably see it, pick it up on that. You can just see the yellow there. All of this has got yellow underpaint, and even the chair cushion has yellow underpaint as well. You can see in the cracks back on the episode where we looked at that cushion that they were yellow when you got down into the cracks. So over here it's green, and it's a sort of a dull green as well. So now we'll get into the detail of it. So starting with the archway at the top, you can see when you get close to it how casually painted it is. It's just blotches, strips of colour and patches, no great concern about where it ends or how thick it gets. Just in this central feature of it is just dabs of paint around the edge to form it. Now, if we look at Vermeer's view of Delft, you'll see very similar things in that painting, even almost the same colours, just dabs and dashes of paint. Again, no great concern. Perhaps this window here is easier. If you have a look at this window, you can just see how casually it appears to be painted. And the trees in mine are very rudimentary as well. So it's really an artist who understands that if you stand back, all these colours just flow together and create an image that looks like it's an image of perfect paint, but it's actually just lively dots of light. This is an interesting one though. This is like a giant hair here. It's actually in fact two hairs and they're intertwined. I'm sure they don't have any particular meaning, but that hair is actually being held onto the painting by a little daub of paint. So I don't know whether that's just an accident or whether it was intentional, but it's a very long hair. So I don't know what it's come from. A person perhaps. Maybe we can rebuild the artist. A bit of genetic engineering. There's a really interesting crack here. I assume it's just crack in the paint, but it absolutely looks fantastically real in terms of being a crack on that feature. I don't think it's a painted crack, but would be amazing if it was. But you can see how casually all of this is formed up, but there is detailed underpainting underneath it. When we get down a bit further on this archway, you can see that a fairly sharp edge turns into quite a rolled edge around here, and I think that's probably for the purpose of all those highlights and details that we saw, but it actually shows quite a distinct form of the arch at the top. Interestingly, it's also a flat arch, and Vermeer's view of Delft was the other painting where a few arches appear and they're also flat arches, and as is the arch that's in Vermeer's Little Street, that's also a flat arch. Whereas if you have a look at this painting by De Hoog, it appears to me that he's used a circular form to create his arch. So a round object, not a slightly flattened object. The leaves of the tree that's in the little courtyard or in front of this house across the canal is very rudimentary. It's just a few dabs of colour. It's really nothing there to be seen of any great form. Some dabs at the top that have a bit of form to them, but apart from that, almost no form whatsoever. You can see how the green sits underneath, and then he's come in with these patches of colour, and then he's just painted his frames through the middle of it, but none of it intersects. Well, it intersects slightly on edges like that, but you can see that he's been quite happy to separate his colours, presumably to assist drying. Now, there is a third figure in this painting that we haven't discussed before, and it's in the De Hoog version, it's a woman standing in a house across the canal. In this painting, it's pretty hard to work out what it is. It appears to be someone wearing a white bonnet and with quite a sort of a gnarly looking face. And they have an object in front of them which is a bit unclear. I'm not going to speculate about who or what it is. There are some big silver objects coming down here, which I think, if this was a gate coming down, it possibly forms part of that. But you can see that there's a strap of some sort there, but where that's heading, I can't really tell. But it seems like it's, again, a bit of this visible-invisible stuff going on, where you're supposed to not see things unless the artist points them out. And when you get down to the bottom of these windows and the doorway here, it's also, again, quite casual. In De Hoog's painting, the edge of the canal is much clearer, but in this one it's actually quite hard to work out whether that's the wall or whether that's a bit of a forecourt. I should point out also that this brown section on this side is also quite elaborate. It has the same sort of carved patterning in it that we've seen elsewhere. As you can see, there's been a lot of paint loss just down this edge, and someone's obviously touched it up with brown, which makes you wonder whether or not they hit a few other bits with a bit of light brown as well. Clearly not too much, because you can see through here where it's not been darkened up. Now over on the right hand side, you can see that the artist has just run his brush across here basically and been extremely casual about painting all of this, and then dropped this rose pink colour just in as a separate patch. It looks like it's been done over the top of that other yellow colour, and been done really casually again as well. Obviously someone who was incredibly confident on the forms that they were creating, because there doesn't seem to be any underpainting to some of these things. There is more underpainting when you get over towards this shutter. And if you look at it carefully, you can see some strange forms again. And it's again these vertical forms with edges that ripple, which have no real reason to be there. You can actually see something painted along here. Have no real reason to be like that unless he is starting to feed in some of this alternative story into sort of a little bit of every scene. When you darken up the archway a little bit, you can see that there are very elaborate little objects hanging down, and concealed inside there's some sort of a chain or something hanging down here. Some of it seems to connect to other things, and once this milky dirt off the top is cleaned off, I think we're going to see some interesting things in here. Again, you can see little jeweled shapes of objects. There's another one just on the edge there. It's a bit of something a bit fancy just there. In fact, it looks like if you look in closely, it looks like something with a bit of form just there, like a corbel. So the overall effect of this relatively casual painting is that when you stand back and look at it, it looks quite precise. And you don't actually realise, you don't read into the fact that most of these areas of paint just don't join up with the one next to them. And you certainly don't actually see all this elaborate stuff inside the archway, although you do get a slight hint of it here. And I do wonder now, if that's so elaborate, and I can see that it is, I wonder what that is. Whether it's some sort of a hanging, a light or something that's coming down. I did initially think that there was some sort of a chandelier shape here, but I really can't see enough of it, and I don't know whether I'm just being confused by light hitting a string of cracks or something. But that's definitely not the case in this archway, because you can see far more of the detail, and the detail is frankly quite amazing. It's interesting, as it gets further down the arch, you'll notice it seems to turn into foliage. So by the time you're down the bottom, it looks like it's just leaves and branches and brambles, etc. But as you go further up, it seems to get some other shapes start to arrive, and then there's this darker bit in the middle. Something hangs out the side here until you come up to the top, and you can see this quite distinct shape here. What it is, though, I'm not quite sure. I want to now move down and have a look at the paving, particularly the paving that's under the archway, and also the paving in the courtyard itself. So let's just zoom in on those and have a bit of a look at what's going on there. Now, what I want you to notice about the paving, first of all, we'll just deal with the back one, which is relatively consistent, but you'll see some slight changes of colour in it. There was a bit of a grey cream colour here. There's a dark grey, and then there's this yellow where the sun hits, and of course he's got green where there's shadow. So this is a person who's not painting it brick by brick or paving slab by paving slab as de Hoog does. He's actually accounting for the change of light across the actual image, and that's a really important feature of this painting, and it's particularly strong where you get out into the courtyard. Now, I want to say that I'm not 100% sure about this orange. I believe it's correct, because it appears to be the same orange that's in some of the bricks, but it's also very close to the orange that's in the signature that we saw on the painting from Inskip. You'll see Inskip's signature down here. Okay, so, and I think Inskip has actually painted a giant signature just here. It looks like a P to me and an I and a K. So I think Inskip has had a big go at this, and he's obviously done that bluey grey line that's across there, I believe, and this black line that's crooked that goes off at a completely wrong angle, and a couple of these other black lines, and I suspect he's responsible for the overpainting. So he's had a big crack at all this area of the painting. I don't know how far his efforts go up towards the door, and I wonder whether or not he's touched up any of these. But just looking at it closely, I'm not sure that he has, because I see that it's there's sometimes a bit of a gap in the colours. It's obviously been painted with a base colour and then painted over the top. So this yellowy colour has been the base, and then it's painted over the top. But it looks very much like I would expect the original painting to have looked. So I'm a bit surprised if he's managed to get such good touching up. But we'll see as experts look at this thing. Now, so clearly it's got this yellow colour in the courtyard, and it actually fades off into nothing. He doesn't try to paint in every last slab, which I think is a really sort of modern thing to do, but I don't believe it's a modern painting by any means. So this is just, he's filled this courtyard with a golden light, and then he's picked out the pavers in, they're obviously two different coloured pavers, but he's picked them out with these three colours, and there's the shift of colour both horizontally and vertically. Now, the painting that I want you to look at now is Vermeer's Little Street. So this is absolutely a magic painting. It's really interesting how he's painted the bricks, etc., and we'll get to that down the track. But if you have a look at these paving slabs down the bottom here, okay, so if we have a look at what's going on in the street, you can see that there's this shift of colour again. There's a horizontal shift of colour going on, and there's a vertical shift of colour. And there's just little bits of each paving slab. Some have got complete full colour, and it's that creamy colour again, that creamy white. And it's a browner colour here. And the under colour looks like it's probably this grey colour. But the thing that's interesting is just this shift of colour. And obviously if someone was forging my painting, they had to decide that they were going to do it like this rather than do it as de Hoogh did it in his painting, which is substantially different. As you can see in the de Hoogh painting, he's painted in every paving slab, and they're pretty consistent in colour. There's not much going on in there at all. Just while we're here, we'll have a bit of a quick look at his inside wall. You can see that there are some shapes on the inside of his wall. Perhaps these two artists were depicting exactly the same thing. There's actually sort of a slight kick in the arch here, but you'll see his arch is actually a circular arch, not a flat arch as well. And he's actually painted in all the bricks. De Hoogh was a great lover of bricks. He was the son of a bricklayer, so he seemed to revel in painting every single item. Beautiful paintings, very precise, but you wouldn't call them as painterly as Vermeer's paintings. So looking at the floor, it's probably worth having a look in the very bottom left-hand corner of the painting. It's interesting, there's a bit of a hole there that you can see. And you can see some paint losses, etc. But what I really want to point out is just the actual colours of the painting in this area and the paint that's been added to it. And if we have a look over the top of this, you'll see that this grey colour has run into this crack a bit. And this is part of Mr. Inskip's intervention. So you recall John Henry Inskip, he was born in 1864, and he signed the painting. He's actually signed it, I realise now, twice. There's one signature there in smallish letters, and there's one giant one here. Now, Inskip's work was on display in the Royal Academy from about 1886 when he was 22. So knowing that his father was a photographer and art dealer, my assumption is that he had these bits to this painting prior to being involved in any Royal Academy work. It would have been, I would have thought, pretty unthinkable to sign someone else's painting. Now, I suppose you might say, well, how do we know Inskip didn't paint this? Well, apart from the fact that the paint that he's painted has run into the cracks in a whole range of areas, so there on the H it's sort of run in, I don't think he's good enough to have painted it, to be quite honest. I might be proven wrong, but I think that these are all interventions by Inskip as a probably late teenager or something, just mucking around or doing some work for his father, a bit of retouching, or just grabbing one of the old paintings that his father had and having a bit of a play with it, trying to work out how to sign his own name, etc. So if you take my argument, and obviously someone's going to have to have a very careful look at it, but this painting looks a hell of a lot older than something that was only painted in the late 1800s. If you have a look at the areas that we know have been painted by Inskip, you can see that this bluey, like pale blue colour has been painted over the top. You can see that this grey colour has been painted over the top, and this colour here has also been painted over the top, this sort of peachy colour. And you can see this creamy white has been painted over the top. But you can see under these areas of paint at the top a sort of a greenish colour, which looks very similar to the colour that's on the very edge of the painting along the bottom. And in fact, this is the colour, one of the colours that's on the right-hand side of the painting, where I don't think Inskip has played around with it too much. So we need to be aware of what Inskip has painted onto it, and you see this black line that runs off at a very strange angle. It's also been over-painted. It sits across the top of Inskip's name. So he's had a crack at a few colours on here, but underneath it, it's unfortunate because underneath it there's some interesting shapes that it would have been nice to know what they are. And I love this one here. It looked. First of all, I thought it was the literal smoking gun. It was. It looks like a barrel and a couple of bullets. But looking at it more closely, there's some sort of a silver object halfway along, or I don't know, towards the end of this tube, and there's a flame here as well. So I'm not sure what this is, whether it's an oil lamp or some sort of ancient gun of some sort. But again, it's something that needs to be looked at. I suspect it's part of the original painting, not part of Inskip's work. But of course, all of these things have to be picked apart. And you can see some of these brilliant colours that have been covered up by this overpainting and, of course, dirt. While we're here, it's just worth noting these silver threads are all over the place again. What they are, I'm not sure. There is an object overpainted in this area. In certain light, it looks like a name, actually, on two lines, but it certainly doesn't look like that here. But with the light in the right angle, it does look like that. That's one of the problems with this painting. You've got to actually get the light for each part of this at the right angle, and what I'd really love to know is how the painting was supposed to be illuminated to be seen properly, because obviously some of these really tiny objects, you wonder how they could be seen, or all those silver objects that appear in the inside of the arch. I mean, are they supposed to show up in certain light and not in others? It's really hard to know what's going on there. You can see that there's something painted down here. It almost looks like leaves, but I've got no idea what it is. But it's been covered up with other paint. So here you can see Inskip's small name and big name across that area. That's my smoking gun with the silver bit at the top and the barrel. Looks like there's a date there, but it's not. I think it's just this paint of Inskip's has just caught the top of things as it's gone across. But that gives you an idea underneath there of what the actual painting looks like in probably across a lot of this floor. Whether these tiles were quite so well defined as we're seeing now, I'm not quite sure. But you can see there's some brush strokes going in different directions. So again, I think there's some depictions of something else going on in this part of the painting, but what exactly is not clear. When you get just below the boy's shoe, for example, you'll see something silver hanging down, and if you look at it, if I zoom any more you'll just lose focus, but about there you can see that it's got silver sort of filigree work. It goes to sort of a darker metal there, and just here it seems to be actually a painted silver object, and if you go up there a bit there seems to be some sort of a clip or other. And if you have a look through there, there's just looks like a hinge. There's a little pin just in the edge of it, and there's another part of it over here, but what on earth that is, you can see sort of a big round part there. What on earth that is, I just don't know. And I think without all this overpainting, maybe it would be a lot clearer. But there's clearly another part of the story being told down in this area. The whole floor reminded me a bit of when you see films of people swimming over shipwrecks, because there seem to be all sorts of little objects that pop up as you go across. And some of them are obviously just dust, but some of them do take on a shape which is, I mean, look in that gloomy bit there, And you'll see that some of them do seem to have some sort of a shape which is not dust, and there's another object there of some sort. Now this is the area where I found what looked like the first signature. To me, it was this one that's in this area here, where this looked like an R with some sort of a flourish under it, and this looked like an M. And what you'll notice if you get in close to this, there's this yellow object that intersects with it and seems to run across it. And right where that crosses over the M, or what looks like an M, there's like a big droplet here that has reflections painted in it. Now, I mean, it does look like some sort of a silver droplet to me. And you can see little bits of silver actually on the side of it there, as if it's got some sort of a case around it or something. It doesn't seem to be random, and these look like fabulous reflections to me. That's it. And it looks like a big bubble. So this area of the painting looks a lot like someone's written something in large letters, but when it's impossible to tell, they seem to be poking through some sort of a yellow, cloudy type structure. You can see there quite a clear object that looks a bit like a leaf. But when you get in close to it, it's got other bits attached to it and that don't make a lot of sense. But I mean, this does look a little bit like writing with patterning around it. The other thing that's a bit reminiscent of this in Vermeer's paintings is the King's painting. You recall the one that King Charles owns, this one here, the music lesson. And when you look at the virginal or harpsichord, you get this sort of fine, detailed green foliage pattern. And of course, this is a copy of what was actually on the instrument, so it's not like as if he's made it up. But it is sort of just vaguely reminiscent of what we're looking at. And of course, up here there's some letters. So it's sort of got a bit of a reference, but a very obscure one. This is some of Mr. Inskip's work over the top. This is where he's painted in around that area. You can see the reflecting bubble or whatever it is there, the big droplet in the top left corner. You'll also recall this is the area where we found a little name. Just those are the letters of the name there, which looks to me very similar to Johann Meer. So, I mean, that's a really tiny bit of writing next to this other thing. And of course the whole lot's been overpainted, which makes life a little bit difficult. Now, moving across the painting to the right, actually while we're on this image, we might just look in the top right hand corner, because you'll see that there's all these sort of shapes pop up all the time. If you have a look at that in detail, you'll see that it appears to be painted. I mean, it's not just paint that's splashed onto the canvas. It appears like there's an object or something there. You can see when you look down into the layers beneath the paint, how different this is to the area that looks like it's been overpainted on the left-hand side. You can see that the paint sort of stops, the paint colour stops at the top of the edge, and below you can look down into the crack and see what colour the underpainting is. In some cases, just like there, it's a greeny yellow, and obviously the overpainting is the same in that area, but in the other area it's quite dark and black. If we go a bit further to the right along the bottom of the painting, you can start to see a few other little objects. They might just be things that have been splattered onto the painting, but it gives you some idea of how the texture of these tiles has been painted, changing from sort of a green base to a black or grey base, but always having these little bits of silver stuff and pieces that look like they're shaved rock amongst them. This little one here sort of fascinated me because I looked at it and there appeared to be a couple of like little legs sticking out of it, and if you turn it so that it's horizontal, it actually has the appearance of a flea pupa. I don't know whether it is just coincidental, but it's just pretty much identical. Little eyes up here and these little bits that hang down. I mean, entomologists might be more interested in it. It's either that or it's just pure coincidence and just a blob of paint that's happened to fall with a couple of things that look like legs sticking out of them. But yeah, there was a bit of an obsession at that time with fleas, and this is painted actually as in about actual size. I think it's about 3mm or something like that, or it's a couple of mils. So it's reasonably sized object in this painting anyway. You can see all these really odd bits of silver. I'm not quite sure what the silver is. Is it? It does seem to be something real on top of the surface of the paint. I don't think it's just dirt or anything. See, this thing here is really unusual as well. I mean, what's this? I think what's happened is the paint has cracked along the edge of the object, so you get this double line, but the object's actually next to a crack. I think that's all that's happened there. But it is sort of a strangely long thing. Let's have a look at where it goes. And yeah, you get down here and there's sort of bits that might attach to it. Looks like there's something hanging off there, doesn't there? The final object I want to point out is that just between the woman's dress and the little platform that the chair sits on, there's another object. And it's almost more important, the fact that there is an object there, rather than trying to work out what it is, or despite the fact I've spent hundreds of hours trying to work out what it is without success at this point in time. And why it's important that there is an object is one of the things we're trying to work out, of course, is whether this painting is a copy of de Hoog's painting or de Hoog's painting is a copy of this painting. And his painting doesn't have any object behind the woman, but this one does. And you then wonder, if someone was copying, why would they add something extra in? It's a bit like the chair being completely different. Why would this artist have changed that? Now, of course, you could have still copied de Hoog and made it completely different. We won't solve that problem here, but I think it's telling that there's objects in this painting that don't appear in de Hoog's painting. And I suppose, to some extent, there's buildings in the windows of de Hoog's painting that don't appear in this painting. So they're both very much the same, but also very much different. Now, as to what this object is, it's a bit hard to tell. I've got some strong ideas about what the very base of it is, and we'll have a look at those details when we get to look at the woman in the next episode. He's done his usual trick where things that appear in shadow seem to disappear almost, but when you look closely at them, there are details in the shadows. And so what looks like just a bit of a casual brush strokes, etc., is not at all. It's actually incredibly detailed. I'll give you an example. If you come up to this part here, you'll see there's little balls. In this, it made me think it might be carved wood. I thought it might have been the base of a table or something, the way this leg protrudes outwards. That's a little lever, by the way. Yeah, I thought it might be the base of a table, but there is no top to the table. There's this strange thing that hangs out the side, a bit like a street light. It seems to catch golden colour, and there's a ball that hangs off the end. And if you have a look just above that little ball, I don't know whether it's hanging off or whatever, but you'll see that there's really finely painted jewels around that with little coloured dots in them. Now, I can't get a better picture of that. It's absolutely minuscule, but that is some sort of a silver painted object again. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that let's see how the edge blurs over the woman's dress, and that makes me think that this is an object that's not supposed to be seen as part of the literal painting. It's part of the mythological painting. You'll notice here there's something that hangs over the top of that in silver, and there's sort of a silver fan shape off to the edge. Very hard to pick out, I know, but the fact is that there at least is an object there, and it's not casual as it first appears. It's actually a really detailed thing. And you'll notice also that it goes further up. This isn't the top of it, it seems to go further. You can see some of the details of it in there. So this whole wall obviously has a sheen of dirt over it, and where that's cleaned off, I think we're going to see in the shadows all of these little subtle objects. And I suspect those objects make up the same mythological sort of temple shapes, etc., that we've been looking at. So you get further up here and you'll start to see just hidden jewels hiding in the shadows, in the murk. I think this is just something stuck on the painting. something that's attracted a bit of dirt, but there's clearly something hidden in the painting itself. So I think where you see light and shade across this green wall, we're going to see that come alive with a whole lot of different little objects. You can see the overlap of the woman's dress there a bit more clearly, and you can see just this little turnover of something silver. A couple of years ago I took some photographs of this area, and I saw what appeared to be a little shrine built into this object, but I'm just not confident that's something that was real and not just a whole lot of sort of silver that looked a bit like a figure. So I won't worry about putting that in today's episode. Some of this is possibly just dust, but certainly this bit here isn't, and you can see some things hanging down that aren't. We're about to have a look at the door in my little painting, but I first of all wanted to just draw to your attention the door in this painting, and it's not so much about the door. I want to play you a little bit of a video of a lecture that Walter Liedtke gave to the New York Studio School some years ago. Walter was the curator of Dutch and Flemish paintings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he was killed in a train accident in about 2015, I think. But he was one of the leading Vermeer experts, and he made a particular comment about this door, and I'll just play that for you because it's pertinent to what we're about to look at.
It's the way the mirror in the background that replaced a man, the proportions of that window against the table in the back of the room. All of these things are, I think, exquisitely balanced with his own sense of proportion. But then you turn to these zips of daylight on the door, and there's no source in that in art for that, I think, and really remarkable. I can't think of anything beforehand in Dutch painting or elsewhere that looks quite like that blinding flash of white light on the door jamb, and can't think of much else until you get up to Manet and Degas, I would say.
One of the things I had to do when I set out to try and work out whether the signatures on this painting could possibly be authentic was to work out whether the paint technique in it represented anything of Vermeer at all. And that little comment by Walter Liedtke about the zips of light on the doorway being unique, and they're unique, according to him, only to Vermeer as far as he can recall, and obviously he's a person of considerable experience. But this has a zip of light on the doorway as well, and it also has one just on the woman's apron. If you notice there, this one's graduated towards the centre, so it comes down, it's sort of dull, and then it brightens up as it gets towards the centre, and the apron does the reverse. It comes up and then it hits its peak brightness right in the middle. So it's another interesting coincidence, if you like, with Vermeer's painting technique, which seems that it's unusual. So to be a forgery, someone would have to have quite incredible level of expertise in terms of Vermeer, but also, as it's turning out, pretty incredible expertise in terms of their painting ability. Just looking at the top of the door, you can see that there's an object along the top of it. It runs across here, and then it hits an area where it's been painted over with this swirly yellow. Now, I guess there's a couple of alternatives. Someone has thought that this should be a bit of window and it's just painted over it, or this is light catching the edge, but the light seems to be a bit coincidental with the edge of the window, so I'm not too sure about that. I would have thought that someone's tried to paint it out, because everything else is far more precise than this, although in the windows I showed you those curtainy looking light flashes. But what's really amazing about the top of this door is have a look at the light that just catches the edge of these studs, these bolts or whatever they are at the top here. You sort of almost take it for granted that we're looking at a circular object, but of course this is a painted flat painting, and what we're looking at is just light hitting. Someone's just painted light hitting some circular objects, and there's a sort of a fancier object up here. I'm not quite sure what that is. It looks like some sort of a bracket or something. But just look at the way the light arcs down here. And there's a flash of blue across the centre there, and it catches something there. I find this quite amazing. And this is a larger object in the middle. It's a larger round object, and it's just a little square of light on it, and little patches of light on each of these. And you'd swear that they were three-dimensional. And this one's picking up colour from a couple of different directions by the look of it. Now the top of the door is hiding some shapes, and I'll try and show you those. You can sort of pick up the yellowish underpaint here of something hiding in amongst the detail of the door. So let's just see if we can see what those shapes are. The object that's on top of the actual door, I suspect it's probably something like a draft excluder. It might be something made out of leather that's attached to the back of the door, perhaps. I'm only guessing, but it seems that if it's anything, otherwise the door wouldn't close. But it would be logical if it was something like that, I suspect. You can see up in the top right-hand corner that there's something underneath the paint, and it looks like it's brass. So it'd be interesting to see when it's cleaned up. I think this might be a bell. I don't know whether it is. There seems to be some sort of a cord or something hanging down just there. And in the middle, you can see something with a little, like a handle almost on it. I don't know, again, what that would be, but it seems to have some form to it as well. It's actually a fairly large object by the look of it. And you can see one of those knobs that we looked at before just there. Again, looks completely three-dimensional, but it's just a bit of flat paint. You can see some shapes in here as well. So I'm not quite sure what most of these are, which is my usual statement for this painting. If you let your eyes adjust with this painting and start to look into shadows, you can start to see objects appearing everywhere. I mean, there's something hanging just here on the door. I'll show you what I mean. I can see a plate of some sort just there, some sort of a plate with some decoration above it, and it comes down, and then something hangs, and there's this, I don't know what these things are. You can see them as part of some object that comes down in this direction. So it's kind of bizarre, the whole thing. We get a bit further down and there's some other object here which seems to be related to something larger just over there. Essentially the door is pretty much like everything else in the painting. It's got lots of hidden detail in it. The difficulty with it is that I don't know whether it's detail that we're supposed to be able to see just by looking at it, or whether again it's hiding some other story. I mean, look at this stud here in the middle. So that's just painted, and you would swear it's a bit of metal on top of a bolt. And when you come over to this side, over to the hinge side, it's worth pointing out that this door jamb is carved on the outside again. I don't know whether I can show it to you very clearly, but you can see that there's some texture and sort of carving in the wood itself. Again, it looks absolutely like real wood. We come down a little bit and you can see the hinge plate. It starts just here and comes down and then kicks up and comes down again. It's just catching the light on the very edge of it. And you can see it along there. So this is sort of like a giant hinge on the edge of the door, and I think it's even got fixings through it from memory. I think I found some like little screw holes or nail holes in it. So absolutely fastidious painting, and how it's been done by anybody I don't know. Interesting bit of blue just there. I don't know whether it's original or not. I think it probably is. And there's a peephole just in the middle here. Just there. Little peephole in the middle of the door. The handle looks a bit rudimentary compared to the handle on de Hoogh's painting, for example. I have taken this with better photographs, which this is not the greatest of them. And this actually looks like a bit of a lion's head, actually. So it's far more detailed than it appears, and I think this is a little thumb latch of some sort. And again, in a better photograph, the fixings are quite visible through there, but it's a bit... I'm not going to go searching for every photograph I've got, because I've got thousands and thousands of them, and I haven't indexed them particularly well, so they're a bit hard to find. There's, again, detailing up the side of the door. And a little metal plate there of some sort. And this thing connects to it. I wonder why that connects and hangs out there. It seems quite bizarre. Maybe it doesn't connect to it. Maybe it's just a bit of dirt on the painting, but it certainly looks like it does, doesn't it? She comes out of that plate. It's above it. Some sort of little latchy thing or something. I don't know. That's the thing I thought was a bell, is it? The door lock itself has a mechanism that's, of course, hard to see, but it's completely detailed. This is the body of the lock that just sticks out the edge of the door. It comes down here and goes to about there. And the little latch, which is, again, if you have a look at it, it's got all the details on it as well. But let's just see if we can pick up any of this. You can see just the edges of a metal plate, I believe, just going across here and coming down there. And inside that, you can see just little hints of detail. Obviously a bolt running through there. You can see something there with a couple of little screws in it, and probably a fancy plate there that's just following along the edge of that crack. And again, there's some detail in that little spot there too. So I think that this is actually all fully detailed out. It's just, as always, really hard to see. There's a bit of metal running in that direction. I think this is over towards the left side of the whatever the bolt mechanism attaches to, or the latch mechanism rather attaches to. I recognise that it's very difficult to pick these things up. You can see there a little something going through and some little mechanism. There's like a pin going through the middle of a plate. And there's another one just there. So the whole thing has huge amounts of detail all over it, just as everything else does. I won't go any further with the door, I don't think. It runs down and there's sort of like a second catch just here. And there's obviously some bolts or other that run straight across the middle of the door there, in line with the lock. Just before we get to the very end of this episode, I wanted to take you back and have a look at another photograph. This is an iPhone photograph I took. I think it might have been the day that I picked the painting up. It was back in 2020. And it's an interesting photograph because even though the highlights are completely blown out on this side, it actually shows, strangely, quite a lot of the detail that we've been looking for today. You can see some of the detail up in this area of the painting, but that's not the most interesting part. If we have a look up the centre of the window mullion, you can see really fine carved detail that doesn't necessarily show up quite as clearly in the other photographs that I've taken. It's probably because the iPhone just processes internally a lot better than my larger cameras do. But yeah, you can see this is incredibly detailed and carved, and there's all sorts of intricacies going on. You can also see up above this door quite nicely that there's an object here. That was the one I've been trying to show. It's still quite difficult to see, but there's definitely something just there in the, and as to exactly what it is, I'm not sure, but it's got quite a bit of detail in that area, and some of it seems to go up a little bit higher there. So I thought those couple of things were interesting. In terms of the door itself, you can also see some of the details of the lock plate a little bit better, where it comes across in this area. And there's some sort of a piece just there that you can see a bit better as well. And something on the door there. Just thought I'd show you that it's not always the camera that makes the most difference. It's really just a matter of whether you can see the light and shade in these areas of darkness. You can see this is quite detailed, and it could actually be something quite substantial on the door there, but who knows. Now here's what I really wanted to show you though. I was looking at this area underneath the chair because I was thinking about this mythical monster that's supposed to live under what appears to be or could be Mount Etna. It's actually a typhon, not python. I think I got my monsters mixed up when I was talking the other night. It was actually typhon that I meant. It's where typhoon, etc., and typhoid, etc., those names come from. And I think it had 100 heads or something. So whether there's any depiction of that under there, I'm not quite sure. But what I was looking at was just this area of the painting, and it occurred to me that looks like a little person sitting on a horse just here. These look like it could be surrounded by other people and marching this way. And this is some sort of a strange vertical symbol, which actually hangs down from the side of the chair. And the chair, I think, might be depicting a gateway through which someone's marching. I mean, it's quite bizarre, really, but given that we saw a little tiny horse just here, it wouldn't be completely out of the realms of possibility that there is a story being told down here as well. Before we finish this episode, I thought it might be interesting just to pop back to Delft very quickly, just to think about whether this scene could actually be a real scene. Because there's not that many locations where you could actually get sun striking the southern wall of a building opposite. So we're looking due north, so obviously the sun hits the fronts of these buildings at various times of the day. But you have to find a location where someone's looking through an archway, which is quite a formal archway, and you would imagine it's not the archway of just a house. It's possible that the woman and the boy are standing in the doorway of a house, and on the left-hand side of that house there's an alleyway which allows people to use that gate. If the arch has wrought iron gates within it, then it's something that could be locked. And the gates of these old cities, of course, were locked at night time to stop invasions, etc. So it's possible that this is a gate that leads on to the Holy of Holies, which would be this central square of Delft, and it was locked. Now, Molenpoort, which is the little alley which runs where this blue line is, right between where the Catholic Church is now and the other alternative location of Vermeer's mother-in-law's house, was either on that corner there, remember, or this one here. If the house was on this side, it's conceivable that this could have still been an alleyway. Well, it would have been. It's one of the main entryways. So it would have been an alleyway that led towards the main square. And it's possible that if there was a building that ran the other way across here, that people could have walked through an archway and accessed the central square that way. So just speculating that it is not inconceivable. The only thing that really doesn't work as far as that theory is concerned is that when we get to the canal itself, if this house that's being depicted was just back about here, little courtyard in between, and it ran across that area there, and you went through the archway, the only problem is that there's no room for trees on the other side of the canal. Everything else works nicely, but there's just no room to plant a tree there because that's the canal itself right up against the back of these houses. And that's the house that would be seen on the other side. Another possible location of this, of course, is out the back of Vermeer's father's tavern, which was in this area just here. It's since been demolished. And this one does have the opportunity because it has a canal which runs straight past the back of the house. Which, try and manoeuvre around so that you can see. So this canal runs back past the back of the house, and there's a verge on the other side with a row of trees. It looks a bit wider than what's being shown here, but that's the Artists Guild. I thought that there was some possibility that De Hoogh might have sat in the back of the Artists Guild looking that way, because you've got to be looking that way to get the sun on the wall. Of course, De Hoogh doesn't show the sun particularly strongly, but he does show some shadow. But the problem with that is that there's no canal over there to look across, so that doesn't seem to work for that area. Anyway, it's an interesting speculation because there are two potential locations that, with a bit of imagination, could have been the area where this was painted. And even if there wasn't a house like that there, it's not impossible that an artist couldn't have invented such a thing. So that's obviously been a really epic episode. I'm sorry it was so long, but there was an awful lot to cover. But I think at the end of it, we're virtually standing at Vermeer's door. There's some very distinctive elements to this painting which deserve some consideration. And I guess on the next two episodes we'll see whether we can actually push forward with that or not, because there's still some other strange things. The woman's dress her skirt is particularly odd and doesn't seem to be of the standard that you'd expect from Vermeer. And the boy doesn't appear to have the finery on that you might expect from a Vermeer painting either. But we'll have a good look at those in the next two episodes and see whether or not the whole thing does move forward or not. And of course there's going to be some really extraordinary things in those two episodes. So we'll leave it there, and I hope you come back and join me for the last two episodes. Thanks very much for watching.